Imagine you're going about your day. Maybe you're doing the same routine that you always do, or maybe you're traveling to some place you've never seen before. But suddenly, you find yourself surrounded by things, people, and a place that feels off. You can't quite put your finger on it, but you know something isn't right. You've somehow unknowingly stepped into the past, another era, a different time. You've fallen into a time slip. I'm your host, Halftone, and tonight we're going to look at 3 time slip experiences that happen to people while traveling. I've collected these accounts from less traveled places around the internet. Let's begin our descent into the first record. This is Project Anomic. Account 1. We'll leave the speed of light on for you. It all began innocently enough in October 1979, when 2 couples in Dover, England set off on a vacation together, intending to travel through France and Spain. Jeff and Pauline Simpson and their friends Len and Cynthia Gisby boarded a boat that took them across the English Channel to the coast of France. There, they rented a car and proceeded to drive north. Around 9:30 that evening, October 3rd, they began to tire and looked for a place to stay. They pulled off the auto route when they saw a plush-looking motel. Len went inside and in the lobby encountered a man dressed in an odd plum-colored uniform. The man said there was no room in the motel, but there was a small hotel south along the road. Len thanked him and he and his companions went on. Along the way, they were struck by the oddness of the cobbled, narrow road and the buildings they passed. They also saw posters advertising a circus. It was a very old-fashioned circus. Finally, the travelers saw a long, low building with a row of brightly lit windows. Some men were standing in front of it when Cynthia spoke with them. They told her the place was an inn, not a hotel. They drove further down the road until they saw 2 buildings. One, a police station, the other, an old-fashioned 2-story building bearing the sign marked hotel. Inside, everything was made of heavy wood. There were no tablecloths on the tables, nor were there any evidence of such modern conveniences as telephones or elevators. The rooms were no less strange. The beds had heavy sheets and no pillows. There were no locks on the doors, only wooden catches. The bathroom the couples had to share had old-fashioned plumbing. After they ate, they returned to their rooms and fell asleep. They were awakened when sunlight filtered through the windows, which consisted only of wooden shutters, no glass. They went back to the dining room and ate a simple breakfast with black and horrible coffee, Jeff recalled. As they were sitting there, a woman wearing a silk evening gown and carrying a dog under her arm sat opposite of them. It was strange, Pauline said. It looked like she had just come in from the ball, but it was 7 in the morning. I couldn't take my eyes off her. At that point, 2 gendarmes entered the room. They were nothing like the gendarmes we saw anywhere else in France, according to Jeff. Their uniforms seemed to be very old. The uniforms were deep blue, and the officers were wearing capes over their shoulders. Their hats were large and peaked. Despite the oddities, the couples enjoyed themselves, and when they returned to their rooms, the 2 husbands separately took pictures of their wives standing by the shuttered windows. On their way out, Len and Jeff talked with the gendarmes about the best way to take the auto route to the Avignon and the Spanish border. The officers didn't seem to understand the word auto route, and the travelers assumed they hadn't pronounced the French word properly. The directions they were given were quite poor. They took the friends to an old road some miles out of the way. They decided to use the map instead to take a more direct route along the highway. After the car was packed, Len went to pay his bill and was astonished when the manager only asked for 19 francs. Assuming there was some misunderstanding, Len explained that there were 4 of them and that they had eaten a meal. The manager only nodded. Len showed the bill to the gendarmes, who smilingly indicated there was nothing amiss. He paid in cash and left before they could change their minds. On their way back from 2 weeks in Spain, the 2 couples decided to stop at the hotel again. They had a pleasant, interesting time there, and the prices certainly couldn't be beat. The night was rainy and cold, and visibility was poor. They found the turnoff and noticed the circus signs they had seen before. This was definitely the right road. It was, but there was no hotel alongside it. Thinking they had somehow missed it, they went back to the motel where the man in the plum-colored suit had given them directions. The motel was there, but there was no man in the unusual suit, and the clerk declined such an individual working there. The couples drove 3 times up and down the road looking for something that they were now beginning to realize was no longer there. They drove north and spent the night in a hotel in Lyons. A room with modern facilities, breakfast, and dinner cost them 247 francs. Upon their return to Dover, Jeff and Len had their respective rolls of film processed. In each case, the pictures of the hotels, one by Jeff, two by Len, were in the middle of the roll. But when they got the pictures back, the ones taken inside the hotel were missing. There were no spoiled negatives. Each film had its full quota of pictures. It was as if the pictures had never been taken, except for one small detail that a reporter from a Yorkshire television would notice. There was evidence that the camera had tried to wind in the middle of the film. Sprocket holes in the negatives showed damage. The couples kept quiet about their experience for 3 years, telling it only to friends and family. One friend found a book in which it was revealed that the gendarmes wore uniforms described prior to 1905. Eventually, a reporter from the Dover newspaper heard the story and published an account. Later, a television dramatization of the experience was produced by a local station. In 1985, Manchester psychiatrist Albert Keller hypnotized Jeff Simpson to see if he could recall any more of the event. Under hypnosis, he added nothing new to what he consciously remembered. Jenny Randalls, a British writer who had investigated the bizarre episode, wonders, what really happened to the 4 travelers in rural France? Was it a time slip? If so, one wonders why the hotel manager was apparently not surprised by their futuristic vehicle and clothing, and why he accepted their 1979 currency, which certainly would have appeared odd to anybody living that far back in the past. The travelers, perhaps time travelers, have no explanation. Account 2. Rough terrain. I was driving, and it was a route that I had driven many times, and I know the route very well. It's a straight road that leads to a small town where I live. The road is a 2-way road with fields on either side, trees lining the road, and a crematorium, and some houses just before the road bends around. For a very short period of time, only a minute, if not seconds, I suddenly saw the road in a completely different light. The road was a dark track. No tarmac, no pavement. The trees were still there, but they were a lot shorter and smaller. The crematorium was gone, as were the houses. It all looked very rural. As you can imagine, I was pretty taken aback and wondered what had just happened to me. It was all over so quick, and I was back driving the tarmac road again. I don't recall feeling like I was driving over rough terrain. In fact, nothing felt different at all. It was all just visual. I have driven that route many times again since, and it has never happened again. I was alone in the car, so I have no one to validate my experience, sadly. So it could be I just went a little crazy for a few minutes. Account 3. Summer vacation. I believe what I experienced was a time slip, a supposed anomaly where time doesn't flow in the linear fashion we perceive it to flow in. Anyway, the day started off with my best friend and I meeting up to go on a road trip outside of our hometown. We were relishing the freedom summer vacation provided, and we were just glad to be away from college and back home with our families. The trip was no more than a recreational pursuit, enabling us the opportunity to observe scenic, photogenic tourist attractions residing outside of our town and within the state. The day went on smoothly, and it was an enjoyable ride. It was only in the latter part of the journey that the trip began to take a turn for the worst. It was evening, and we were on our way back. The return trip should have taken no more than 3 or 4 hours tops. As we entered a particular route, the calm, cloudless conditions suddenly altered into dark, cloudy weather. This rapid transition was rather strange, but being the ignorant teenagers we were, we let it go and just continued with our conversation. As we drove on a bit more, it became apparent that the storm was unfolding. This storm wasn't any different other than the fact that the clouds seemed to take on a mild yellow hue and the air seemed to be buzzing with electricity. The hair on our necks started to stand up, and the speedometer and gas reading on the car went haywire. At this point, my friend became startled, and she began to complain about the sudden lack of cars. There were only a few cars that were tailing by in the near vicinity, and since the road was straight, it was rather creepy that they just disappeared. By now, it was fairly obvious that we were both freaked out, and we came to a stop. It was fortunate that we did so because the car completely cut out, and the storm became more intense. We both got out of the car, and I volunteered to travel up the road a bit in search of some help while she stayed in the car. I was certain that there were a few houses along this route and continued trekking along the road. It was about a while through the trek that the storm seemed to reach a climax with loud, discordant thunder and intense lightning before it abruptly stopped. Almost immediately after the storm stopped, it dawned on me that the scenery had changed, becoming rather strange. It wasn't so much that the type of vegetation and the natural features, but the repetitiveness of them and their structure or shape. Perhaps it was an overreaction, but it just felt abnormal. After having covered 2 miles, I began to lose hope when all of a sudden I noticed a bright light behind this hill. I hadn't noticed the hill before, but considering my attention span, I didn't think much of it. As I rounded the hill, I came across what appeared to be a street that led into a residential area. I jogged along the street, and it was then that the street struck me as being odd, because the houses had garage designs that were circular, and the roofs contained what I think were sheets of dark metal rather than tiles. The street was also really quiet. I walked about the street a bit, and then I heard laughter. Transversing to the source of the laughter, I came across a house with a middle-aged woman who coincidentally reminded me of my best friend, probably in her late 40s or early 50s, playing and laughing along with her grandchildren in the front lawn. I approached the house and said, "Excuse me, do you mind helping me out?" She turned and looked at me, and then an expression of pure consternation and dread enveloped her. She immediately stood up and backed away a bit, and then started to rapidly exclaim, "Oh my God, this can't be." This really scared the hell out of me, to say the least. She reacted like she saw a ghost. I know at that point I should have left, but I was reluctant to do so, out of fear that she might call the cops, mistaking me for a serial killer or a robber of some sort. So instead, I tried calming her down and pleading with her. "Wait, please calm down. I just need your help. Please, I really need help," I said. Those last few words I uttered pleadingly because I was getting desperate. Fortunately for me, she must have registered my desperation because she stopped backing away and approached me a bit closer, and again, I thought I saw my best friend in her. Strange as it seems, I felt a closeness to her at that point. Her grandchildren by now were crying, and she tried to console them. When they quieted down, she turned face to face and said, "Is it really you, Jessica, honey?" At this point, I felt my bowels vibrate and my stomach squeeze into itself. Now, there were only 2 people who call or have called me Jessica. The first person is my best friend, who does it as a joke considering my name is Jessie, and the second person is my grandpa, who loathes me and considers me to be an effeminate disgrace. To reply, I said, "How'd you know?" It was at this point I looked at her and saw a strange mark below her blonde hair on her cheek. It was a burn mark. Now this is important because my best friend has a burn mark too in the exact same spot. I started to back off and began to sweat profusely. I was incredibly uncomfortable where I was and felt the desire to run away were it not for an inclination holding me back. In all honesty, it was weird, really disturbing and confusing. Her grandchildren were now screaming and she tried to console them. I looked at her and said, "Please, what's going on?" She looked at me and said, "I'm not sure, honey, but it's wonderful to see that gorgeous, youthful complexion of yours again." I looked at her as if she was insane. In fact, amidst the fleeting suspicions that she was the future version of my best friend, I tried to reassure myself that she was no more than a person suffering from dementia. The noise of her grandchildren now attracted the attention of people inside the house. A man, probably in his late 20s to early 30s, with a tousled mat of blonde hair and a white coat came rushing forth. As he drew closer, the uncanny similarity between me and him scared me. "Mom, what's going on?" he shouted. He rushed forth and stopped as he looked at me. "No way," he said. "Dad, it can't be. No. But you're young." By now I feel like vomiting. 2 more people came out of the house. A gorgeous blonde girl with a business suit, and another young man with a business suit. They looked at me, and the girl quickly stated, "Holy crap, he looks like Dad did in his college photos." By now my vision began to fade, and the strange stormy weather had reappeared, much more intense than it was before. The lady turned to her daughter. I looked at her and saw a gorgeous beaming face, a face that I've grown accustomed to since I was a young toddler. I felt certain it was my best friend's face. At that point, I actually felt happy, and before I knew what happened, the storm started to become more severe, and then it went pitch dark. I was in the middle of a field, with trees and cows off in the distance, and I had blacked out. I woke up sometime later by a farmer who found me and had called an ambulance. I was at the hospital, and before I knew it, my best friend had came along with my family. She told me that 8 hours had passed since I left till the farmer found me, and it was just about sunrise of the next day. Apparently, I was found 120 miles from where the car was. She asked me what happened, and I said I don't know. I think she knew I was lying, but she hasn't mentioned it again. I doubt I'd ever tell her. The actual encounter with the lady lasted no more than 5 to 7 minutes tops. I can remember it with such clarity and detail, and the time I thought till I left the car to the point where I blacked out was no more than an hour tops. It has caused me to question the parameters of what we refer to as paranormal. I never knew a phenomena such as time travel existed, and I'm certain I had a glimpse into the future. I'm curious of what you guys think of these stories, so let me know in the comments below. I'm Red Halftone, and thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. I'll see you in the next one.